join Sarah and welcome you. My name is Brian Wallace. I'm the curator at the museum, and I've had a very interesting 2-year or so journey with my colleague Leslie Stratton at Huguenot Street. I don't want to diminish the contributions that many people have made to this project, but I want just at the outset to say a warm personal thanks to Leslie for all of her help on the show, teaching me a lot of stuff I didn't even know I didn't know. So, thank you very much, Leslie. You know I do appreciate it very much. One of the joys and terrors of being a curator at a museum is being made aware on a daily, if not hourly basis of how much stuff you don't know anything about, and then being expected to sort of wheel yourself onto some stage somewhere and act like you do know what's going on. Don't be fooled. I have had an incredible learning arc over the course of contributing to the conceptualization and realization of the show at the museum. Learned a lot about museums, and I've learned a lot about historic sites, and I've learned a lot about how people can work together to make very interesting and innovative projects happen. So widening out a little bit from the focus on my co-curator, before I introduce the panelists, all of whom have made interesting contributions to the show, substantial contributions to the show. I want to also acknowledge our funders, in particular the Kobe Foundation. I'd like to also recognize the folks at Historic Huguenot Street, including some staff members and board members, past and present. I'd like to mention Eric Roth, and I'd like to mention Susan Stesson-Cohen, and I want to mention Sherry Osborne, all of whom were in the room the first couple of times Leslie and I looked at the Coverlets and began to get really excited about the possibilities for making a museum exhibition out of material that had been held and attended with great care at a historic site for a number of years. So thanks also to those people. Just a few other folks. I want to thank Kevin Cook, who, as many of you here today know, has been leading really great tours of the Coverlets show. To say that we trained him would be a slight misstatement. Kevin he's an artist and a born educator, and he gives good tour, does Kevin, and he's helped a lot of visitors to the museum have great, meaningful interactions with lots of really different shows. So I don't think I quite see him in here. He's probably, even though his tours are almost finished, he's probably taking notes on how to make the next tour better. That's Kevin, but thank you to him. Also, Valerie, thank you for helping record the event for posterity. I also want to acknowledge Andy Pletch, who is a professor of computer science here at SUNY New Paltz. What the heck is this guy from mentioning a computer scientist for? Well, the museum, at the beginning of every semester, offers a little sort of come-on to the faculty. We invite them to come over and take a look at our upcoming schedule and have a little bite to eat. To make a long story short, when we introduced the idea of the Coverlets show, I was pulled aside by a computer science professor, and maybe because I have this background myself that involved a stint at a science and technology museum, he and I were able to sort of speak to one another about these 19th century textiles in the language of 20th and 21st century computing. Leslie and I have been aware of ties between the Coverlets and modern computing technology. That's one reason that we gave the exhibition the title Binary Visions. But Andy and I had a great chat about the procedures and ideas behind the design and making of the Coverlets. And to make a long story short, and also to sort of transition into introducing our panelists today, he and I, and then Andy and some other folks, had some great conversations about how students could get involved in the museum exhibition. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and this might come as a surprise to some of you, but the first presentation is entitled Student Research on Interaction Design. It's a work in progress by current SUNY New Paltz students in graphic design, working with some folks in computer science, based on the Binary Visions exhibition. Now, what these students are doing, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you have to pay attention. They're developing an app for the Android phone. So this is sort of some 21st century leading edge consumer technology. This is what all the kids are doing when they're looking at their phones, walking around and driving up in front of your car. This is very interesting stuff, and we're really happy to have been able to foster at the museum a very unique collaboration between people in graphic design and people in computer science. I have to tell you, there may be some images of this, but I'll just draw you a brief word picture also while I do this, just for a couple of minutes, because more people are walking in. When Amy Pelias' students and Andy Clutch's students first came to the museum, there we were standing in a gallery with a collection of 19th century textiles, and we're looking at a prototype of a 21st century kind of combination of an Amazon Kindle and sort of cell phone on steroids all in one package. And we're comparing different screens and looking at different programs that are used to write applications for these wireless devices. And I'm watching students sketch in a little sketchbook with a pencil, and he's switching to a pen, I think in the same hand. And it was a really incredible, beautiful, interdisciplinary, multiple learning styles, Howard Gardner, this is what museums are all about moment. I actually was peeking over the student and thinking that I was having a real kind of, verklempt moment, because I was watching a kid learn visually in a museum. This is what we're supposed to do in a museum, and this is how it happens. And I'm really happy that this was all prompted by discussions we had sort of collegial discussions, the museum connecting with people in the community as well as on the campus to make something really unique like this happen. So I don't want to oversell it because it is still a work in progress, and I really want to thank Amy Pelias and her students for kind of coming out on a Sunday afternoon and showing work in progress. So Amy's going to, and her two students are going to present in very short order. They'll be followed by a colleague of mine on the faculty here at the college, Jessica Poser, who's going to, as you can see in the program, we have extra copies if you can get one. Amy's going to present on, I'm sorry, forgive me, I'm going to have Leslie go after Amy's presentation, forgive me. So after Amy, Leslie will present on organizing the exhibition. Some reflections on curatorial process, historical scholarship, and of course what she does, cultural interpretation, and institutional planning. These are the sort of behind-the-scenes activities and ways of thinking about collections and institutions and audiences that all of us in museums and historic sites engage in. So Leslie can give us some insights into the things that she has learned and maybe had to unlearn a bit during the course of working with the museum. Then, sorry about that, Jessica, a colleague here at SUNY, as well as an artist, will present on fancy work, an artist's perspective on intersections of craft, abstraction, material culture, and history. Finally, our friend and colleague Rabbit Goody will, who's a textile historian and weaver, will present on coverlets as products of and evidence for technology and innovation in the Mid-Hudson Valley and beyond. Each of these presentations will be 15, 20, more enthusiastic, we all go a bit long, 20 minutes. I'll try to be a timekeeper, and then I will try to facilitate a conversation amongst the panelists, and then all of you at the end. So, just to reintroduce, Amy Pelias is Assistant Professor of Graphic Design and Foundations here. She received her MFA in Intermediate Design from SUNY New Paltz, an alum, like that, and a BA in Cultural Studies from McGill University. Leslie is the curator at Huguenot Street. She's been at Huguenot Street for nearly 25 years. She has an MFA from Temple University, go Philadelphia, and a BFA from Syracuse University. Rabbit, she sort of knows it all, and she's been doing this for a long time. For 35 years, and she's had a long-standing interest in the work of weavers, and in particular fancy weavers. She also knows of what she speaks. She's an accomplished weaver, and she owns and operates Thistle Hill Weavers in Cherry Valley, New York. So last but not least, I'm Brian Wallace, again, I'm the curator of the museum. So thanks again for joining us. And I'd like to introduce Amy Pelias, who will speak and also introduce her two current students, great folks, Christian Torres and
the Android device, of course, is a screen, so we're dealing with pixel devices. So this is another student who started to break down, well, what are the grid systems that are happening with the coverlets? Now these are students that have not any experience with coverlets before, and this is just their first foray, Coverlet 101. So they're just starting to kind of understand, what are the processes for creating these, and how they can incorporate it into their own designs. From there, so this is the sketching and the ideation. From there, we go into started thinking about the structure and the wireframing for the application. So wireframing or storyboarding is a way that interaction designers sort of try to break down what are these steps for an application. In this case, this is really a game that we were working on. So wireframes just sort of help to show how this is going to work. So this student, Brittany, she actually printed out these templates from the computer and then hand drew over them her, starting to kind of develop the ideas for her games. So this would be like the intro page, some information, hard to see this a little bit. A lot of them got into this idea of maybe choosing a template of a pixel system that you could work with. And my students will get into their own ideas. Just to show you, this was the wireframing that they all did. And then they also created what we call a visual flow chart, which again starts to document the step-by-step, what happens when I click this button, where is this going to take me next. So this is another example of a student's in progress flow chart. From there, we also worked on what's called a GUI, graphic user interface. So as visual designers, we're the visual people. We're really interested in creating graphic elements that help to improve the user's experience. So the students spent a lot of time working on the look and feel of the app as well. So this is some custom buttons that Jillian created for her app. And most of these maybe are a little bit self-explanatory, but these two buttons are just to show that if you made your design, you could then inverse the color. So this is just a kind of, so they're learning along with this here. And then this is another interface design from a student named Nikki. So she kind of integrated some images from the actual exhibition into the design itself. So you can quit the program, you can get some info, or you can start weaving. So you can weave instead of start. I'm so happy you guys. I wish like my whole class was here. So, and then from there we had to tell the story of the app. What does your app do, and how is it a little bit different from everybody else's? So I'll just go through a couple of interesting ideas very briefly here. This student, Zach, had the idea that there are these shapes that exist in the application. You could choose a couple of shapes, and then when you hit generate, it creates a random pattern. If you don't like what it's done, you can hit generate again, and it will create from those same shapes a different pattern. If you don't like that, you can go back and add a different shape or form, and that would then create a new pattern. So now from here, what we would then do is then give this information to our computer science students, and they'll make this thing really work. That's the next step. Another student had this really interesting idea of the idea of unfolding. So once you created your little design here with your little icons, that then, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the game Solitaire. I don't know if you wasted a couple hours of your life playing Solitaire. After you finish the game, the cards like spill down, and you just feel so good about yourself, you would want to. So she had this idea that would be a really cool thing, that it would unfold the pattern for you after you've created your design. Yeah?
Could you try to speak? I just can't hear you. Could you speak?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Is this better? Can you hear me now? A little bit. I don't know if the mic is very. Can you hear me back there?
It's difficult.
It's difficult.
But
I'm
it's
sorry.
better.
Okay, I'll really scream then, because I don't. Is this on or?
It's on, but it's not very
It's not. Okay. Yeah. Let me see if I can. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So this idea of unfolding the design once you've created it. Can you hear me better back there? Okay. All right. So, and again, this just shows you the idea idea of the reversing of the pattern. That was a big thing, and we noticed that in the museum, obviously. This was sort of a funny idea that the 21st century coverlet design, that you could take a picture with your Android phone, and then the app would colorize the picture and then make it into your pattern. Not very traditional coverlet app, but maybe an interesting 21st century translation in terms of the graphic symbols that are around us and the way that we use imagery. So I thought that was sort of funny, interesting to show. So you would take your photo, the app would then make it black and white, and then translate it into your coverlet design. And then finally, they were charged to name their app, which of course is a big part of the marketing of an app. You need to have a really fancy, cool name. So just a couple of them. This one is called Loomer. This one is called the Luminator. So app there. And then we have the Warp and Weft app, which I think for those of you that are familiar with some of the processes. So anyway, I wanted to introduce my two students, and they'll just briefly talk a little bit about their specific projects and talk about how the coverlets inspired them. So who would like to go first? Christian? Yeah? Okay, so we have Christian Torres first.
If you can't hear me, just let me know. I'll speak louder. Put some more bass or something. Okay. So I named my non-mobile loom. As Brian was saying, when he led us on the tour of the museum, I started out with sketching out a template. It's kind of hard to see it up on the projector. But I started out by sketching out how I thought the coverlet is designed, made, how the grid is structured. I went from there, and I created, like Amy said, my GUI over a template of an Android. After some more sketching, I noticed that we would be using the Entourage Edge, which is a tablet, the Kindle and the tablet. So I designed it on the Entourage Edge. So I'll show you. So basically, you can use both sides of the tablet at the same time. So my design incorporates both those sides. These are the buttons that you use for the thing. These are called, I nickname them stamps, which are the images put on coverlets. And then these are the tools on the side, and this will be your screen that you use all the time. So this is the startup screen. This is just information about the museum and your existing options for going through the application. So if we were to click on existing, it would bring up a screen of saved apps. These are all saved to the device, and you can go back, edit, or go back in and upload them to online, any social network. This is existing, so these are apps that we create, and I was using all the coverlets in the San Andreas Museum. We would replicate those digital, and they would be a library that you can scroll through. And you just use your finger to slide the screen left to right to left. This is just the credits page. It gives us our credits, and there's a slideshow of all the coverlets in the museum, so going on where you can place. If you were to click New, you would bring up to this screen where you can select a template. And my design, you design one corner, and like the example you saw before, it unfolds vertically and then horizontally across. This is the selection screen. So the grid is broken up into a corner, border, main section, and where is it? The edge. I'll just use the edge. You would tap the screen on the section that you want to design, and it'll bring that up and give you a little bit of information about that section and what usually is put in there on real coverlets. This is just a more complex grid. You can slide through, and you can select a grid that you want. So this is the editor section. In this section, you get the grid that you chose. I chose the corner to design on. And you would bring up options on the side, and this is a live preview. of your coverlet. And these highlighted corners are the corners that you're designing. So if you were to place a stamp on the grid, you would press the tools option. It would bring up your tools on your left hand side. Select the tool that you want, and you can move it around. Once placed, the stamp is generated in those corners, and it's replicated in all four. It's like a mirror. And you can go through, these are the tools. This is a pencil tool. It allows you to activate any pixel. So you can go in there on the grid and just press one pixel at a time if you want. This is an eraser tool. You can deactivate a pixel. This is an inverse button, so the colors will be inverted on the coverlet. Zoom just lets you get closer. And undo. So if you make something, you do a mistake, click undo, and it takes out that. If you were to select preview, your coverlet is blown up and you see exactly how it's made. And you would just go on and create all the sections using that. That is all. I'll explain things on that.
Hello, my name is Hillary, and my app was called Engraving because it's all based on touchscreen, so you'd be basically looming with your finger. This is just a brief description how my app was designed on the 19th century coverlets on Huguenot Street. So. And then this would be the splash page. When you would first click on the app, this would come up, and you would click play. And it would bring you to the menu bar where you can either start looming, edit an existing design, history, and then gallery. If you were to hit history, it would bring you up a page of description of the history of the coverlets, how they became, how they're made, their geometric designs, and how I'm trying to replicate those geometric designs with my application. If you were to hit start looming, it would bring you to the point template place where you could design, you could choose between 6 different templates to create your design. And my design is based on snapping to a point. So you would have a section of designs, and they would each snap to the different points, and there was 6 different ones that you could choose. And this is my toolbar. There's a square shape tool, circle, floral, pencil tool, erase, question mark for directions. It'll explain to you what you're designing. Back arrow and forward arrow. So if you were to select the square shape, it would pull up more in-depth square designs, all based on the Huguenot coverlets. They're all designs drawn from the previous coverlets in the museum. So then what you do is you place it on a point, and it'll snap to that point. And then to change the size, you just tap once for small, twice for medium, and 3 times for large if you wanted to alter the size of each shape. If you wanted to rotate a shape, you simply just move your finger around the screen and it'll rotate it. And then when you want that shape to stay in the direction it's in, you just lift your finger up and it'll snap to that place. And then once you have completed your design, or at least put a shape on each point, you can generate it to expand and duplicate like on the coverlets. So you can choose either a 2x3, 2x4, 3x5, 4x5, 6x7, or a 6x8 design, which will duplicate your design. So here my design has been duplicated by a 4x6 grid. And once you're at this page, if you want to change the design, you have the option of going back to do a different size to duplicate it. You also have the option to invert the color. That's represented by the white and black boxes on the bottom. And if you're happy with your design, you can hit the blue arrow to move on. To save it to your gallery, you can view galleries of other people's coverlets. You could start over, start a new design, or you could share your design by emailing it to a friend, sending it in a text message, or uploading it to Facebook. And yeah, that's my idea.
Thank you, Amy. Christian and Hillary, thanks very much. During the course of our many discussions about the coverlets and how to make them meaningful to a 21st century audience, Leslie and I really struggled to come up with terms with which to describe the patterns, particularly for the geometric coverlets. The floral or more representational coverlets seem to have their own language that comes with them, of course. I wanted to always pretend that I didn't know where the patterns came from because I was very interested in trying to come up with a new set of terms with which to describe the patterns and to try to understand the procedures that led to the coverlets looking the way they look without any sort of cultural baggage. That's of course impossible, but it was a very interesting exercise to try to engage in. And I just got a whole brain load of new terminology to use to describe the coverlets. So that was really great. I love the kind of informed, free thinking that goes on when people are looking at objects with real curiosity and respect, but also openness to new thinking. So thanks again. It was really, really interesting. I have to not go any further before I acknowledge that I forgot to thank a really key person before. Minor mistake. Ashley Hurlbut from Historic Huguenot Street was a key player in helping Leslie and therefore all of us make the show happen. She was there to help organize all of the curatorial work that happened and had some really great insights into individual coverlets and the ways that we were thinking about this. So when I realized that I overlooked her, I wanted to make a special mention of her. So thank you, Ashley, very much. Again, my mistake. I want to just, again, introduce Leslie as curator of Huguenot Street. She and I worked together very hard on this exhibition, and I'm looking forward to hearing her try to distill two years of work and 25 or so years of thinking about these objects into a short presentation. After she finishes and after we're done here, I think we'll all just go back to the museum and we'll just talk all night about it. So, Leslie, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Much respect.
It's extremely gratifying for me to be standing here today to talk to you about this collection. And I have to say, never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that we would be getting to the point where we could be discussing coverlets and apps. So I just think it's fantastic. And I do have to say that I think, and I know that Rabbit is going to talk to you a lot more about this as the afternoon goes on, but I really think that even though weavers of the 18th and 19th century did not have that kind of technology that we have today at their fingertips, they would have gotten it very quickly after a few tutorials, because really what the students are doing right now is a 21st century version of the way design took place in the minds of and in the hands of weavers and designers in the past. So I think that this is just such a great way to be envisioning these collections, and I'm kind of dumbfounded really at what I'm hearing. I think it's just amazing. So thank you so much. I also just wanted to mention that, and I just want to give this a little additional credit here to Ashley. Ashley is the person that put our online exhibit on the HVRH website. If you get a chance to go into that, take a look at it, because it really kind of does a complete overview of this collection and the exhibit. And I also want to thank Ashley for all of this. I've been the curator at HHS for I think it's 23 years. And all of the time that I spent in the beginning years was really to organize the textiles collections as I understood that they needed additional care and maintenance. When I came to historic Huguenot Street, the 102 coverlets that we have in the collection presently, which at that time was probably about maybe, I don't know, about 85 coverlets. We've acquired some since. But they were in various places all over the street. They were under beds, they were on beds, they were in drawers, they were in plastic bags, they were in trunks. A lot of coverlets were in trunks. And I recognized the fact that it was a fragile collection and an important collection that needed to be put into a space where it could be better organized and better cared for and ultimately studied, because they were all over the place. And there was really no really interesting way or valuable way to take care of them. So we really did have to kind of rally the forces and get all of these coverlets. And I'll tell you, handling coverlets on a day-to-day basis, and this was also the case for quilts as well. Any large bedding textiles, they're heavy, they're unwieldy, and they do require special care. So it was kind of exhausting work to try and put all of these coverlets into one place. We did finally organize them into one textile facility on Huguenot Street, and I'm very happy that they have better care where they are now. But again, when I first came to the street, so much of the coverlets were viewed the way historically they would have been viewed, on beds, or else they were folded up and put away. And so I never really had an opportunity to look at them full out, the way that we have been able to look at them as a result of doing this exhibit. So, do I want to just start with this? How do I just open up this so I'm just looking at that? There. Then I can control it from this at Very good. So here is the typical view that one is used to looking at a coverlet. It's on a bed. It is a bedspread. Coverlets were not designed to be hung on the wall. They were not used for other purposes. They were bed coverings, and they were designed to keep us warm. So that is the way that they were always presented in our historic house museum settings. This is one of our fancy figured coverlets in the Little Feeder House. We also discovered, as we were going through our archives, that we had some intriguing images of people using coverlets, or in this particular case, dead people. This is a post-mortem photograph that we found in a photo album. It has history to the Elting family, I believe, but it's an anonymous. We don't know who this person is. But what we just found so marvelous about the image was that this person the photographer chose to photograph this woman in her last hours in bed under a coverlet, and in this case, probably a float work, or as they're also referred to, overshot, but a float work coverlet. So this is the kind of intriguing, sort of graphic material in our collections that I hope we will discover more of as we go along. I think for me, as a museum curator who's dealing primarily with family histories and how these collections relate to historic Huguenot Street, I guess one of the other things that I found so intriguing about our coverlet textile collection is that there is so much specific information relating to the families who own them. And of course, Rabbit will go into this a little bit later. These coverlets were woven for the client. And the client, for the most part, was a woman, although occasionally you have gentlemen whose names show up in the borders. Josiah Hasbrook, right there, is the only gentleman we have that's represented on a coverlet in our collection. But these would have been the owners of the coverlets. And as you can see, for the most part, most of the names here are of family who are part of the founding families of New Paltz. And I just realized this last night as I was going through the database. The one family that is not of the early New Paltz family, that is not represented in our coverlet collection are members of the Bevere family. We don't have any Bevere coverlets. We have Eltings, Hasbrooks, D.O.s, spelled in various different ways, Ann Blake, who was probably from Orange County. But primarily these are people who lived in the Ulster County, or certainly the lower Hudson Valley. And so for that reason, 102 coverlets, most of them having family history attached to them. I think that's a pretty cool thing. And I think that that's what makes our collection particularly important. It is so very site-specific. So this is just a little smattering of these names that I thought you'd like to see. And these appear in the inscriptions on the fancy figured coverlets, and also too on the corner blocks of the coverlets. I had said before that I had never had the opportunity to look at these pieces other than flat out on a table or on a bed. So I chose this particular geometric design, one of these double woven coverlets, to show you, because when you see it in its reverse, you see light on dark, dark on light, and then you see it photographed for the first time in a professional manner, you really do get to see the importance of the graphics. And at this point, when you are able to photograph them in this large format, we worked with Gilbert Plantinga, who's the photographer who did the coverlets for us for the exhibit. And he only photographed 25 of our coverlets, by the way. I'll have to have him back some other time to do the rest of them. But we really never got the full view, the full power, the full optical majesty of, and I use that term because I particularly am intrigued by the geometrics. The fancy figures are also incredibly important to us, but that particular coverlet that I have on the screen is the coverlet that spoke to me early on about the power of this collection and how much more I wanted to really see it. But never having been able to see it any other way than on a table or on a bed, or as I said, wrapped up or folded up in a box, was frustrating for me. And it really was only at the point where we had the opportunity to do this marvelous exhibit, where we were able to put these coverlets and exhibit them on walls in a contemporary art setting, that we were actually able to bring in a professional photographer. So that was when we were able to really get the true power of these things as they were photographed in their whole, in their totality. But one of the things I remember that was very interesting was when Brian and I were first looking at these coverlets. Brian had come up to our collections area, and we were really, really intrigued by the optical play that goes on when you stand at one angle and look at it, and then you move around. Your diagonal lines start to change. You get what I call a headlight effect happening with the geometric sometimes, depending on which side they're viewed from. And then seeing them sort of photographed full front like this, you get another whole range of optical complexity going on. And that was what was really, that really, really excited us. And I think we were saying that it was one of the few times when we had the pure joy of simply curating, in the sense of just being able to look at these things and view them and analyze them and be intrigued by their design and to be excited by what they represented, even without knowing that much technically about how they were made. Because the one thing I do have to say, I get it how furniture is made, I get it how glass is blown and how metals are produced, how metal objects are created, but I'm not a weaver. And so of all the collections that Historic Huguenot Street takes care of, this collection is the most mysterious to me because I don't really understand the technology involved in making these things. And that is going to be an ongoing effort on my part to try to understand these better. But anyway, it was just such a joy to be able to really look at these things in order to choose which coverlets we were going to have for the show. And of course, the other thing too was that I think there's 19 on exhibit in a relatively small gallery. Making a decision about what you wanted to exhibit was a big challenge, and it was exciting to do, but at the same time, I wanted to exhibit them all. So here again is this issue I had. Never having seen these things other than flat out on table, down flat like this. This is the same coverlet reversed. And again, you can see our facility. It's cramped, it's small, it's very hard to really move around and walk around. And so having to make decisions about what we wanted to exhibit ultimately was a bit of a challenge. But you get a sense as soon as you start to roll these out on the table what it is you're going to really want to focus on. And we knew that we had some really important pieces that we wanted to talk about. And of course, this coverlet, in a sense, became something of a mascot for the show. So seeing it out on the panel, on the front wall, and again making sort of just straight out optical, visual, curatorial decisions about what we were going to hang next to what, how these pieces would look in relationship to each other on the wall as your line of sight. This is walking into the gallery, as your line of sight goes down into the room. How do these things play off of one another? This was an exciting opportunity, and one I would never have been able to do if I was simply dealing with these pieces on beds. And I have to say, one of the things that I came into in this exhibit, or in this whole experience, as a history curator, as a curator working with artifacts as opposed to contemporary art, I know that these coverlets were meant to be on beds. They were not meant to be hung up on the wall. It's not artwork that way. So for me, at one point I was joking with Brian, I thought we ought to have the gallery ought to also include a bed with a coverlet on it. But as we got working on it, and I knew that we were going to be dealing with things above and beyond their original artifact purpose, it became clearer and clearer to me that I could drop that sort of old school curatorial art thing or artifact thing to talk about these on a different level. Some of the early days of looking at these pieces when Rabbit came down, and Brian and I had made a lot of our decisions initially about what we wanted, or the cover list that we had chosen that we thought would be in the show. Rabbit came down, and her initial function was to kind of look at our collection of the selection we had made initially, and then to help us kind of lean down what it was she thought would be important for us to talk about, so that all of these different issues would be dealt with in the exhibit. And also to put her input in about what was really a great coverlet versus what was an okay coverlet. We got better things we can show. So she helped us with that a lot. Gilbert's, again, an incredible experience for me to work with a professional photographer to get these pieces photographed. Now, Gilbert could not photograph these all in one photograph. He had to photograph half of a coverlet. Then Ashley and I would help him to turn the coverlet around so he could photograph the other half of it. And then through the magic of the Adobe workshop, he was able to, and certainly you all know how to do that already. To me, it was a big mystery. But he was able to stitch the coverlet together so that visually it looks like one great big photograph of one coverlet taken all at the same time. But in fact, he had to do it in sections. And it took us 3 full days to do these. But it was, again, and every single time I was looking at these in a different light, out flat, so that I could really see them. I was seeing new things in them. So it was very exciting. And again, Gilbert had never photographed this type of textile before, so it was a learning experience for everybody. Now, this is where things got lots more fun. We also have a very small collection, but a very nice collection of carpet remnants. And Rabbit is going to talk much more in depth about carpet weaving and the connections between carpet weaving and coverlet weaving, which is really on some levels one and the same. But we had this bunch of scrap coverlet pieces that we had boxed up, and we pulled them out and we put them on the table and we pieced them together. Rabbit helped us to try to figure out how these pieces would have gone together. These would be what you're seeing on the floor here. These are original pieces from the Locust Lawn collection. So we were looking at these, and a couple of weeks prior to that, I had been looking more closely at one of the remnants. I've been looking very closely at this particular piece right here. And I said to myself, I know I've seen this design someplace before. And Ashley said, yeah, we have seen that design before. And so we discovered that what we had been looking at all along was, and this was kind of the missing link, artifact, we were looking at a coverlet remnant that informed the design history of our woven coverlet. So Ashley basically took two photographs and we put it together so you could see that our carpet weavers are bringing this aesthetic with them to coverlet weaving, and where you have a carpet, you've got the tulip motif there. You also see it again used in the carpets, and so in the coverlets. So here is your link. Here is one of your artifact links that help us to understand better the design influences that go into the production of coverlets. And because carpet weavers were, and again, I'll let Rabbit really talk about this more, but carpet weavers were trained in this weaving technique, and so they were the ones that were also producing the coverlets. But you can see it's almost an identical pattern, and yet it's coming from two different artifacts. One is a rug, and one is a bed cover. One of the real mysteries for us here in New Paltz is that we know, many of us have always known, that there was a mill at Libertyville, which is just south of here, close to where the Ulster County Fairgrounds are now, in that area. We have 11 Libertyville coverlets in our collection at Historic Huguenot Street, and I am sure that there are probably dozens of coverlets in private collections here locally and in other places that were also woven at Libertyville. But we don't know anything aside from the fact that it was founded by members of the Du Bois and the Lau family in New Paltz. Du Boises were also, who had gone out to Libertyville in the 18th century, who were also blacksmiths and brought a lot of other probably mechanical disciplines with them that all would have been incorporated into the development and into the running of a mill. But aside from that, we really didn't know, or we still don't know that much about the Libertyville workshops. The photographs on the left are two views of the workshop as it stood in the early 1900s. It has been torn down, there's nothing left, but I think that if a bunch of us got together and went stomping around down on the banks of the Wallkill River, we could find the foundations where this mill is. And I'm sure there are people who know more than we do, they just haven't come forward yet. So we have a lot of research to do, but I think that this is a really ripe area for research, and it's going to help us to understand our local economy and our local textile industry here in the New Paltz area, as it kind of was part of that larger, very, very active textile operations that are going here in the lower Hudson Valley. So this is just part of a bigger picture. The large coverlet on the right is not in the exhibit. It's the biggest coverlet in our collection, and it is unique to this group of Libertyville coverlets that we have, and I'll explain that in a minute. Notice the design as the central medallions with the grape leaf motifs around it, and it's a much more scrolled, much more sort of elaborate, I hate to use the term Victorian, so I won't, but it is a more elaborate kind of scroll design than some of the ones that you've seen in the exhibit. and at the bottom it says, done at Liberty, New York, for Laura Talmadge Hasbrook, January, I forget the date, but 1846. So this is the only Libertyville coverlet we have that is dated, that helps us to set the time period for when this was made. Now this is in comparison, in contrast to these. This is what the brunt of our Libertyville coverlet collection consists of. This type of design with the central Federal period eagles, the urn motif and the sort of classical revival motifs that go around with the edges. And again, it's always, the inscriptions are here. Libertyville, Ulster County, New York, and in the case of the one on the left, Dinah Russo, and the one on the right, Ida Du Bois. So, but no dates. And so we don't exactly know when these were done, but I'm going to guess they were done in that 1840s period, but we still have research to do. Sometimes you can get a sense of the date by looking at the name of the women's name, and doing the genealogy on this, but sometimes it's difficult. The one on the right came to us just this year, and this is the only red and white one we have in our collection. It shows up on the screen as red and yellow, but it's actually quite red and white. And yellows, of course, the whites, of course, fade to yellow, or they discolor to yellow over time. It's not quite like that. So this is an unusual one and a rare one for us because we don't have a lot of red ones in our collection at all. So it's a wonderful comparison, contrast to the others, which are blue and white. This is my last slide. This is another wonderful kind of artifact document that we have, or an archival document that we have in the collection. This is Christopher Freer. Now, Christopher Freer died in 1910. This photograph was taken of him in 1900, and he was making plain cloth and carpeting. He's listed as a carpet weaver in the New York censuses for 1900. And he is doing this weaving in the Bevere Elting House on Huguenot Street. This is the only occupational photograph we have in the collection that we found so far that's not only of an individual living in one of our houses on Huguenot Street, but it is also intriguing because in 1900 you still have people who are weaving. He's probably doing a lot of rag carpeting for local folks. And it's a guy. And I mean, one of the things that, again, a lot of people who don't have any or who have not had an opportunity to study coverlets, a lot of people are surprised at the fact that these were woven, most of these were woven by men, not women. And so you have that sort of occupational shift. We tend to think of textile history, textile production as something that comes out of women's work. And yes, it certainly is a very important part of it, but for the most part, our weavers were men. And I will oftentimes say, if you read Silas Marner about the English weavers, he was a guy. So it was a male-dominated, as it was on the commercial level, it was a male-dominated occupation. And because these men were trained, they were going outside of the home. They were not in the home weaving for the family. They were weaving on a more commercial level. The photograph was given to us by his grandson back in the 1980s, and I did not pay a whole lot of attention to this photograph when we first got it. And actually, what intrigued me more about the photograph was that if you look very closely, those large colored chromolithographs on the back wall are advertisements for the Adrian's Farm Machinery Company in Poughkeepsie, which at that time I was actually more interested in than I wasn't. But this is now a very, very important pictorial for us, and we hope to continue to study these individuals as we find out more information about them. The obituaries don't talk a great deal about him. They talk more about his wife, but they were living in what is now the Bevere Elting House on Huguenot Street at the time of his death in 1910. So that's an important history there. I wanted to keep my talk short because I really want to give more time for Rabbit to talk a little bit more about the technology and the history. I just wanted to end my discussion by saying that, if I haven't made it clear already, I am absolutely thrilled at what this exhibit has allowed us to do in terms of showing a very important collection off to the public and to the larger and a broader and a different audience that one would perhaps see at a contemporary art museum. I think that there's going to be great opportunities in the future to continue to exhibit artifacts in a contemporary setting, and we love what the contemporary artists are doing in terms of the design elements and the influences that they bring to these collections. And I couldn't be happier about how this is all working out for everybody. So I just wanted to thank everybody involved. And at that, I will introduce Jessica's next. Yes, thank you. Jessica's next. Yes, I want to introduce Jessica. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. I just want to mention two things while we're transitioning. Maybe I can give you a small one. No, that's not a good idea. Don't think and talk at the same time. I want to invite everybody, if you haven't already left your email address with us, we have little forms that are floating around. We can give you a form to fill out with us to capture your information, and we will reward you through a drawing that will take place at the end of the program today. My friend and colleague Richard Ortiz at Huguenot Street will be raffling off a really excellent book published by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, John Hamilton, their Coverlets collection. So please do share with us your email address, and we will send you occasional reminders of upcoming exhibitions and programs at Huguenot Street and the Orson Museum. So Leslie mentioned the presence of artists as another way of helping to build a common vocabulary here. It's interesting that our collaboration on the Coverlets has yet another backstory. Very quickly, an artist who lives in the area named Tim Davis, who's someone who I was made aware of by a colleague at another institution, Center for Photography at Woodstock. We commissioned informally Tim to come and take some photographs at Huguenot Street. This is a little trial run 2-3 years ago. Tim then got the American Academy Rome Prize and was gone for a year. But before he left, my friends at Huguenot Street were good enough to let Tim kind of rattle around the houses there and take some photographs, quite unlike the usual documentary photography that takes place in a historic site setting. Very interesting, artistic, indirect photographs that were then displayed at Huguenot Street, donated to the museum's permanent collection, and while they won't be in an upcoming show of Tim's work, they help to sort of get things going with the museum and Tim, so that now we'll be showing an exhibition of all new work by this artist coming up in April. Another artist who we have in common is our colleague Jessica Poser, who got herself engaged with Huguenot Street and was a really interesting sort of emissary and agent for us during our discussions in the course of developing an exhibition of all new work that she made over the past couple of years based on her research into the collection at historic Huguenot Street. So without further ado, Jessica Poser. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Poser and I'm teaching here at the college in the art education department. And this is going to be a little bit of a tangential adventure, but I want to talk to you about a body of work that I developed for the gallery at historic Huguenot Street, and about my take on interacting with historic collections as a contemporary artist. So this exhibition, which was at the Gallery at Historic Huguenot Street in this past summer, 2010, was a site-specific exploration into the spaces and decorations of the historic Huguenot houses. I was inspired by the woven coverlets, wallpaper designs, and embroidery patterns. And I used everyday materials to create work for the show. Things such as, and you'll see this in the work throughout, things such as cardboard product packaging. You can see some of the items in there, mostly from food consumed in my house, and plastic bags, amongst other kinds of contemporary materials. And I wanted to use these materials as a way to articulate an exchange between contemporary and historic patterns and textures. My work in general has been, as Brian mentioned, often concerned with exploring intersections of craft, abstraction, and material culture. And originally, how I got involved with the site was, like many, I was really captivated by the stone walls. And when I first saw these, actually, they had been recently repointed, so the mortar just kind of really stood out as this emblematic pattern throughout the whole street. And so I've always been interested in architectural patterns and facades, but I wanted to engage with these as a kind of design element, and I made this piece for the Celebration of the Arts in 2009, which is actually a fiber, it's a hanging fiber piece. And when this piece was up on the site, I was invited by the person who was curating the gallery at that time to come and do a show, and the following summer. So that was when, you know, the really exciting stuff began, and I started to spend a lot of time at the houses, and I started to have these wonderful conversations with Leslie about things in the collection that I could begin to work with and respond to in my own work. So I became particularly interested in a few things the more time I spent there. The coverlet collection, wallpaper design, and Godey's Ladies book, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. I remember when Leslie first took me down to the basement to look at the coverlets, it was very exciting. She's like, come check out these coverlets, they're so beautiful. So I like Leslie mentioned, I was really attracted to the optical qualities of the coverlets, much more so than the figurative coverlets. That was just, you know, my particular tendency. But I wanted to develop a body of work that responded very directly to the site and with my engagement with it. And I wanted to tease out some of the connections that I saw emerge between historic and contemporary patterns and materials. So I began to create a series of these works, and these are, this one is about 24 by 24 inches, and it's a translation, basically my own translation of the pattern, but it's all created using tiny little squares of cardboard packaging. And I'll show you a few of these. Well, here's the details so that you can see what that actually looks like. The overshot patterns kept kind of coming back as something that I was really interested in, and I wanted to develop a technique to make these where I was actually building the image piece by piece, which in some ways reflects more of the technique that was actually used. In other words, it wasn't something that I would paint. It was something that I had to build, pixel by pixel or particle by particle, to kind of create this whole. And I wanted to use a contemporary palette, again, to kind of reinforce that exchange. So that's why I chose these kinds of materials, because for me, that's what constitutes a contemporary palette. Although from a lot of these, you think that all I eat is cereal and beer, but it's really not true. They just have beautiful packages. And from that, I created this piece, which I actually have donated to a historic Huguenot student. I think Leslie has it in her office. And again, you can see how those were built, those images were built. So the first image that I showed you is actually based not specifically on this. This is a picture of the wallpaper in Deo, and actually Jason Davis took an amazing photograph of painting on this wall. And so I used a similar kind of scrolling design from the same era, and then translated it into this piece. Again, using collage on panel. This one is larger. It's about 4 feet by 2 feet. Okay, and then the last thing that I spent a lot of time with were the Godey's Ladies books. And this is a monthly that was published from 1830 to 1878, and it was considered the queen of monthlies. And you know, imagine living out here, kind of in the middle of nowhere. Leslie told me about how women would anxiously await the arrival of this book because it was really their connection to what was going on in the outside world. It included poetry, articles, and engravings. But the thing that I was most interested in was that it gave women all of these patterns that they could use to make the fashions of the time in their own homes. I just found out when I was looking at this material last night that the editor of Godey's for most of the time that it was being published was Sarah Hale, who was the author of Mary Had a Little Lamb. That's interesting. So I integrated a lot of the patterns that I found into the mixed media work, and this is just to show you. You know, this is kind of like showing dresses that were fashionable at the time. They used some color. They also had articles, modern coaches, you know, things that were important for genteel women to know. There was advertising, but there were these patterns. And so this one is actually to make a cigar case, to make your own cigar case. They would actually give you patterns of how to crochet things. Making bags, hairstyles, you know, all the kind of important information. They also gave you patterns for slate pictures for children to draw on their chalkboards. So I became really, really fascinated with a lot of these patterns, and I documented most of these images directly from the collection at Huguenot Street. This is drawing lessons, like you would learn how to draw from copying these things from the book. And they're just gorgeous designs. But you can see a kind of vernacular, pattern vernacular that changes over time. And I'm going through these kind of quickly because I included a lot of them. But this one, for example, would show you how to create a braided slipper, you know, with the braiding on the silk. I incorporated into this piece, which is a mixed media piece made mostly with fused plastic bags, and then the patterns were overlaid with wire mesh, and that's a close-up. And this design, an embroidery design for a pincushion, ended up on this piece, which is a little bit hard to see, but the background was kind of inspired by some of the plaster falling apart plaster work that is throughout the houses, which is really beautiful, and then the pattern is over top and it's stitched into it. This pattern for braiding ended up on this piece, which actually has a stone wall design in the back. It's many layers kind of built up, and so that you can start to see this exchange between the various images. Some of the articles in Godey's were just really interesting, and the titles for all of my pieces were taken from Pagodes articles. So excerpt Genealogy of Jewels. These were all articles from the ladies' book. There was so much incredible material in there. Articles on how to make a happy home, the contented mind, something about good temper, the management of flowers and dwellings, mind your punctuation. And this passage, which I want to read to you, is kind of emblematic of a lot of the spirit of these Godey's Ladies book, which was to this idea that you should always be busy, even if you were genteel. And it seems to have a connection to this notion of fancy work in general. But they wrote, in this age of women workers and minds full of earnest ambitions and generous and noble aims, it is sad and strange to mark how many of our sex still pass through life laboring under the demon ennui and the curse of an aimless and purposeless existence. So I thought that was pretty interesting. That's from 1859. So for me, an ongoing interest in using historic research and site specificity was a way to kind of activate the space for me and to kind of have my own conversations with the ghosts of this particular place. There are so many contemporary artists right now working with craft-based techniques who are concerned with both history and the kinds of dialogues that I've been talking about between the present and the past. And I think that these investigations are often a way of trying to make sense of the world and a real desire for the kind of simplicity and order that some of these designs can provide us with. But also a real desire for connection and for materiality and things that can be touched, and a physical way of understanding the world around us. The artist Janice Jeffries wrote, "To craft is to care. It implies working on a personal scale and acting locally." And I think that's a really nice idea. I just want to show you a couple of contemporary artists that I think, that's just to show you what the work looked like in the space, because it was really specifically made for that room. And also that around the corner, Leslie created a case with examples of the Godey's Ladies books so that you can kind of see that interaction. This is a piece by Laurie Anderson. I'm sorry, it's a little pixelated, but it's called New York Times Horizontal, China Times Vertical. And I think that's a really nice way of thinking about weaving both physically and conceptually. And another artist who has inspired me a lot is Dinh Q Lee, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. He's a Vietnamese artist, and he did a series called From Vietnam to Hollywood, where he hand weaves strips of photographs using traditional brass weaving techniques that he learned as a child. And so I think that's a really lovely example of bringing those dialogues to bear on both the ideas and the materials. So, thanks very much.
Last, until we get to the discussion portion of the afternoon, and this is someone who is demon ennui is a complete stranger. How good. That's all you get. Thank you, Robin.
Well, I was going to talk about something, but I think I may talk about something entirely different as a result. So, my mission was to talk a little bit about the technology and innovation that gets us coverlets and carpet. And let me just say really briefly, we're all pretty clear on what makes a coverlet. We call it a coverlet when it goes on a bed. Weavers at the time referred to these specifically as carpet coverlets, primarily because they were carpet weavers. who took an understanding of a particular weave structure and a particular style of weaving and created a marketable item for rural American markets. Coverings are coverings, though, whether they appear on a bed or whether they appear on the floor or whether they appear on human form. A covering is a covering. Just go like that. I just want to show you a couple of genre paintings from the period, and I want you to look at the carpeting. Carpets are the important thing, not coverlets. I hate to disillusion all of us, but carpets are a luxury item that becomes very, very important to showing status in the 18th and 19th century. Carpets were wall to wall. They were woven in strips. They were sewn together. They were tacked around the perimeter. Carpets are floor covering. We don't call them rugs. Rugs are small bits of coverings that go over carpets. So in a typical room, and I didn't spend any time looking at those genre paintings, but typically we would expect to see a wall-to-wall carpet with a drugget over the area where you most often walked to protect the carpet because it was expensive, and then a hearth rug small in front of the hearth, a rug in front of a chair. So rugs are small, carpets are large. Carpets are also used as table covering, but it's still covering. The technology that brings us ingrain carpeting and the carpet coverlet is a technology that begins to evolve in the 18th century. And as I'm sure those of you who have heard me speak in the past will get tired of what I'm going to say, but technology does not invent anything. Technology comes into being because something exists, and we either need to make it faster, we need to make it more accessible, we need to do something to change how it's being done. So carpet weaving is going on, coverlet weaving of some sort, bed coverings are going on. The techniques were being done using either two individuals or very complex systems. And in the 18th century, we start to develop a lot of mechanical ability that allows us to make things a little bit easier for one weaver to produce a very complex pattern. But pattern weaving, the fancy designs that allow us to see lions and tigers and bears, has been going on for roughly 3,000 or 4,000 years before we get the Scotch engraved carpet loom. And notice no one here, none of the speakers and in none of our written information do we ever use the term jacquard when we refer to the figured weaving that we see in the coverlets in this exhibit. Joseph Marie Jacquard was an inventor of sorts. He, like Singer, was very clever. He went around and looked at everybody else's work and put some great stuff together. But what he did was very specifically for the brocading industry in France. I have a picture up here of the Scotch carpet loom. The kinds of coverlets and carpets that we have in the exhibit and the kind that we're familiar with in America come from the Anglo-Scots-Irish tradition and have nothing to do with what the French were doing. The term jacquard does not apply to ingrained carpet, to carpet coverlets, to the figured coverlets in the exhibit. And there's a big distinction because we're actually producing a very different kind of cloth. What's important to us, in light of the other panelists today, is to make a distinction between what weavers were designing and what were being designed by artists at the time. And this is a point that I really want to talk to instead of where I was going to talk. Because it seems very clear to me when we look at the apps that are being developed. that one of the things that distinguishes what the height of a tradesman's work is whether he is or is not the designer of his work. One of the things that happens when we develop technology is at some point we start to separate the layers of production from those who are the artists and those who are the producers. The weaver of this coverlet was a trained trade weaver who went through an apprenticeship and who drew in his book, making his own grid paper, a series of squares and designs to come up with this particular pattern. Whether he had seen this pattern someplace else, or seen elements of this pattern someplace else, or even copied it from his master weaver, he was capable of drawing this design. His information, his training, his knowledge of his equipment allowed him to develop patterns like this, each one different. And I've looked at thousands of coverlets, thousands of geometric coverlets at this point. And weavers were, in fact, creating their own designs, taking the elements, just like in the apps, and putting them together exactly as you guys are doing, in exactly the same way, flipping them this way and that way. And in fact, we design on what we call a quadrant system, where I literally design one quadrant, take a mirror, put it here, take a mirror, put it here, and have the whole design. So I only have to design a quarter of the design. Works really well for almost all those coverlets that you saw. This weaver knew his equipment. He knew the capability of his loom, and he knew how to make patterns. When we get to the figured coverlets, the lions and tigers and bears, and when we get to, and I'm going to jump ahead to the same slide that Leslie showed. When we get to this, and by the way, this was probably in my career of doing research on coverlets and carpets, the most important slide I have come across in 30-some years. I wept when I saw that. Where did we get the inspiration for these designs? Was it the weaver, or was it something he saw, or was it the artist? And in fact, if I flip back to the little, to our loom for a minute, altogether the patterns, or you can't see it, there are designers for carpet weaving as well as for calico printing. That's all you need to know. That the weavers themselves, once we get into figured weaving, did not necessarily understand how to make designs for their new equipment. And this is true of James Alexander, who was a coverlet weaver in Little Britain, New York. We have some Alexander coverlets in this collection, and there's one in the exhibit. Alexander came from Ireland, studied in Scotland, settled in Connecticut, moved to Little Britain. He was a weaver. We have his day book. We understand what he was weaving and for whom he was weaving and what he was charging and the names of his patterns and what was to be written in the corner blocks. We have some of his drafts. Not one iota, not one pen stroke shows that he knew how to design that design. But in his advertisements, when he starts advertising figured coverlets, he says, "Lately arrived from Scotland, my apprentice, so-and-so, has come with the latest designs." And our answer is that by the time we start to see figured weaving in the Hudson Valley, although the technology is here by 1821 to do figured work, James Alexander, who was trained as a geometric coverlet weaver, did not himself know how to make those designs. And when we look at his coverlets, we see a very well articulated design for the center and a very poorly articulated eagle thrown onto the bottom of the coverlet. So to me, what essential information in understanding how technology is applied to coverlet weaving is this separation from a weaver who understood his equipment, could draw his own designs, could go anywhere and do it anywhere, to a man who has now purchased a piece of equipment that sits on top of his loom, in which he is dependent on artists, either in New Jersey, Philadelphia, New York City, someplace else, drawing designs, punching cards and paper, and the weaver is acquiring those. He has no interface with them. The most interface he has is to be able to put the name, to change where the name and the date appear, to change how they appear, so that he can change from Susan B. Smith to somebody else. But that's all. Or he can draw a little bit of a design for a border and not have it be particularly articulate. Now, that's not to say that was true of every single weaver. We know there were weavers who were also designers. But that separation changes the life of the weaver from somebody who is capable of creating new designs to somebody who becomes simply a part of production.
Or a farmer.
Well, or a farmer. We do have very, very few surviving carpets that were produced in America by weavers who were making coverlets as well. Almost every weaver who is weaving coverlets advertises that he weaves carpet, but the American wool quality was so soft that although there was lots of American carpet woven, the wool quality was soft enough that the carpets didn't last. And you'll feel the difference when you later get to feel things. But we have 3 or 4 pieces that we can document to weavers. This is one of them. This is from Maryland. We don't know the weaver, but it is an absolutely magnificent, domestically produced piece of American carpet. I'm sorry that picture is so bad, but that's another one of the very rare fragments. This piece is maybe American, maybe not. I have it here, actually. You can look at it. This is a fragment from Harry Tyler, who was a coverlet weaver in upstate New York, and it's the only fragment we have of his work. There's a close-up of it. The American ingrained carpet is constructed differently than the Scottish or imported ingrained carpet, so it's easy to tell it. This is the earliest documented piece, and doesn't it look like a coverlet? Well, yes, of course. This was designed, this is a part of the 4 roses or multiple rose design that we see in coverlets, but this is a piece of carpet. Jones Mill in Cold Spring Harbor, 1830. It's in the Society for the Preservation of Long Island Antiquities, and it's an amazing piece because it's a full repeat, and very similar in style to the carpet fragments that you have. This is an early piece of engraving. We don't know who wove it. We're pretty sure it's American, but I'm not 100% sure. Very interesting little design, tiny repeat. And this piece of engraved carpet that we're pretty sure is also American. This is not an American piece, but it gives you sort of another version of what engraved carpet looks like. And this one, which I think actually very similar to the one I brought. And coverlet. So I think you can see where the interface between carpet design and coverlet design comes from. And my interest is in this disconnect between the weavers who understood and could design and the weavers who couldn't and become simply weavers. I'm not going to blabber on because I know we're short on time. I just want to share with you one other carpet piece. This is a Masonic carpet. Once the engraved carpet industry in America got going, it was one of the booming industries, textile industries in America for a fairly short period of time. This is a Masonic engraved carpet, and it literally goes through all of the different levels, has all of the symbols. But we see Masonic symbols in James Alexander's coverlets. We see Masonic symbols in other coverlets that say agricultural manufacturer of the foundation carpet. It's not uncommon to have Masonic symbols. The Freemasons, weavers often were Freemasons. They were a trade, like any other trade. But to find a carpet whose repeat is, in fact, entirely for use in a Masonic hall is pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. And I sort of don't know what came first. It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. But my goal always is to understand how something was produced. Because unless you can replicate how the method that it was produced, you can't truly understand it. So to that point, my own work is always evolving in trying to understand the equipment. I'm much more interested in the tools and the technology than the product. I know that's awful to hear, but the reality is once it leaves my loom, I don't really care about it. I'm not attached to it. I'm attached to the process. I'm a process person. So to understand the equipment, I'm still struggling with how certain things came into being. My job is to find out how exactly this came into being. And that's my work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So what is your big question right now? What's your burning thing that you're trying to figure out or that you don't understand yet how it was made?
Coach lace. Yeah, which is a type of velvet weaving that was used as trim. And none of the books, none of the records of it actually are the way it was done. I'm convinced that there are a lot of trade secrets that never got written down. And there's a lot of equipment that doesn't exist anymore. But there are a couple of big holes in how things, weaving horsehair fabric. The technology to pull the hair across is something I've been working on for a long time. I mean, in every aspect of textile production, we have lost certain technologies, certain understandings. They're just gone. And because the written sources don't help you to really understand the physical process. But I don't consider myself an artist. I really consider myself a tradesman. And when people ask me, I say I'm a weaver by trade. So.
And I'd like to add that when I first met you, you were in the process of actually taking apart. This is something else you do. You take apart and refurbish old mill equipment.
Yeah, all the equipment we run in our mill is
right, and it's all been refurbished. Right, but it's
and if you go online on our website, you can see it running. And it runs.
So you've broken down whole mills and brought them back to Cherry Valley.
Yeah. Oh, and can I say something just as a comment? Don't confuse the word mill like the Libertyville mill. All right. When the term mill was used in the 18th and 19th century, it refers to the power source. It doesn't mean that the equipment was all run by power. Just understand that the term mill is different than what we think of when we say a mill.
Right.
Okay. Right.
And that area of Libertyville, if you look at the mid 19th century maps, there's a flour mill there. There's fulling mills. There's water-powered industry of some sort. And in actual fact, we haven't come across the term woolen very much. So we know that the Libertyville did other things as well.
Yeah.
Given that we've got all of these coverlets in the collection, they must have come from that area.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm sure they did.
Yeah. So anybody that wants to tramp around with me when I really want to do this. I'd really like to do this. Let's see if we can't find the foundations of that building.
Did you all have any questions you want to ask each other? Because probably a million.
I'm just thrilled with the apps. I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. Are there some questions from the floor that I could entertain? Probably a million. Yes.
Can somebody tell us a little bit about these wonderful pieces of fabric on the floor, or carpets,
Okay,
or whatever.
They are pieces of ingrain carpet. They are the same weave structure as the carpet coverlets. You can come up later and play with them. The only difference between these and coverlets is that they're usually all wool, worsted wool and wool, and they lack the kind of form or border that a coverlet lacks. And coverlets usually have borders on 3 sides or 4 sides and have corner blocks. Ingrain carpet doesn't, but that's just a small, difference. But that's the inspiration for the carpet coverlet.
Yes.
Is the can you tell us if there's a relationship between the patterns from, you said, the British Isles and coverlet patterns from other parts of Europe or southern parts? Is there a relationship?
Oh, absolutely. And what everybody wanted was the Oriental carpets of all kinds were used for extremely high-style aristocratic homes in Europe and in the Anglo-Scots-Irish communities for the extremely wealthy. Notice that in the genre paintings, you do not see a single Oriental carpet. Oriental carpets are not appropriate for American homes in the 18th and 19th century, period, end of story. Some Brussels, some pile carpets were, but mostly the flat woven carpets, these are all inspired by the same sources. So we can follow pattern development from Oriental carpets into these flat woven carpets and tile designs, and we're seeing all the same kinds of designs over and over again. They become a little bit Americanized during the Federal period, but we don't tend to see eagles in carpeting. We tend to see eagles and those kinds of symbols on bed coverings. And the bed coverings form the same, or hold the same statistical status place in our lives as the bumper stickers on our cars. So that we're likely to see campaign stickers on a car that says blah, 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 2010. We're going to see the same kind of thing on a coverlet that says liberty, united we stand, divided we fall. We're going to see eagles. We're going to see Masonic symbols. We're not going to see those in the carpet.
Agriculture,
Right. Manufacturers are the foundation of our independence.
Yeah. Does that mean then they weren't expecting their bed coverings to last for very long? Because when we put bumper stickers on, it's usually a temporal type of thing. It's just making a statement at that moment. And
I don't know, farmer. Have you thanked a farmer recently? You expect that to stay on your car, I hope. I guess what I'd say is we.
Well, I think
that's a valid point. No, that's a valid point.
Farming, for example, was a very big thing for a certain period.
Right, I understand what you're saying. The entire concept of longevity. These items were expected to be passed on. They were expected to last. We don't have that kind of short-term thought. Carpeting, however, wears out. But carpeting was primarily there to protect the floor. When you think about it, it's much easier to change carpet than it is to change a floorboard. So carpets lack those kinds of things, but bed coverings don't.
There was a question in the back earlier.
Yes, I wondered, is this red and green strip of carpeting new or old?
It's old.
And actually, I wanted to bring up the fact that because you asked whether it was new or old, I think it's a sense that these are so bright and so colorful. But if you look at American folk art and some of the paintings that Rabbit had on the screen, and then you think about what people were living with at the time, color. I mean, we are so used to things being faded. We kind of value the faded and the worn, but these were bright interiors, and those paintings very easily show it. And that's a perfect example of what the kind of color people are living with.
But if you turn out the electric light and put on candles, you will see these in very different colors.
Yeah.
And if you come to Eastfield Village in the summer, we generally do that.
Yeah.
So,
That's
yeah.
true.
Yes.
The question for Leslie. You said you had organized the coverlets and they were everywhere. How do you have them stored now?
I was looking last night for a good slide, and believe it or not, I don't have a decent photograph to show. We keep them wrapped in acid-free tissue paper in large, oversized textile boxes, or we keep them in a safe plastic. And I'm always telling people, if you don't know where the plastic bag came from that something's wrapped in, throw it out immediately, because you don't know. But we do use heavy polyethylene bags for storing them in. But for the long term, they get put into acid-free boxes, and they're folded up and interleaved the way you fold up a quilt and put away that way.
One other thing, what's the possibility of one of the coverlets in the exhibit being turned so you can see the reverse side?
Well,
just a corner of it up?
Well, we talked about creative ways to do that and couldn't come up with anything that didn't seem corny or really dopey looking. I guess you have to use a mirror, I guess, or have one. I think there is not an easy way to do it.
There are lots of images.
Right, we don't touch them.
Yeah.
There are lots of images of the reverse side.
Oh, you are. Yeah.
Oh no, no one was ever tempted to touch any of the products. And I can assure you, on behalf of our visitor services staff, that no one ever did touch a single cover. Well, there may have no.
If we were doing a larger show, we do have the duplicate coverlets. If we could have done a larger show, we might have been tempted to do one of each reversed.
One of the things we did with the show was when we felt sort of licensed to be a little irresponsible, because we had the expertise. I felt this way because I felt that Rabbit and Leslie had my back, and you could take some chances and do a couple of unusual things with this show. One of the things we did was to do what is not fashionable in museums, and that's to take an object out of its context and show it sort of stripped away of all of the historical, personal, cultural information. Now this, when done with particularly with artifacts from cultures to which this has been done a lot, can be offensive. It can offend religious sensibilities, cultural sensibilities. Here, because we felt that in a certain way we knew enough about these coverlets, we would not be doing a violence to their history or the history or culture of their original owners and makers, if just this one time, in this one small show, at this one small museum, we showed them taken out of context and really more in a way that allowed us to appreciate them visually and optically. I'm aware that there is an argument against ever doing that with any object. We felt that guardedly it was all right to do it in this case. Another thing is, so what follows from that is that this is not the last show of these coverlets. We're really hoping that the exposure they've received and the kind of prod that they've been to historians will lead to more new scholarship on these coverlets and on the way that coverlets circulated and functioned in the culture of their time and have circulated since then. As you've seen today, they're an inspiration for recent and new work in art and design. That's really exciting. For its own sake, and also because it will spur people to take another look at the original objects. So this is not the last time you'll be seeing these particular coverlets. There are 102 minus 19 more that have yet to be shown. And if we show them again, I guarantee you we'll come up with some more interesting ways to try to display them in a way that lets us sort of interact with them a little bit more. Yes?
Could one of them have been displayed sandwiched between Lexan, which does not leach,
yes,
or tempered glass?
Yes, it could have been.
We thought about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a space problem. But yeah, a sand right smack dab in the middle of the gallery. How cool it would be to have something so that you could go, but next show.
Okay.
We did show one or two of them backwards, so to speak.
Okay.
There's a big discussion about whether they would have been shown upside down, right side up. There are a lot of probably incorrect ideas out there about whether they were flipped seasonally, what people would do when it came time for this newfangled thing called the camera to come in and photograph their home. So the evidence, I don't think, is definitive as to how they would have been shown, up, down, you know, at the same time, what have you. So there are a couple in the show where we did try to show the back. Again, and we tried to be very clear about this. These were based on sort of personal optical preferences and not the body of scholarship that you'd like to think is there to dictate whether it was shown front or back.
How do you know which was front, which was back?
Typically, the sort of peripheral materials, the way the edges would have been finished off, and also the balance between lights and darks. And in the case of certain weave styles, it's the structure of the weave tells you right away. But in the double wovens, it comes down to
They're meant to be
finishing techniques.
No, they're meant to be reversible.
Yes.
They're meant to be reversible. Ingrained carpet is meant to be reversible. Because that's one of the things that in the advertisements about why it's better than a pile carpet. You know, why housewives, do not buy a pile carpet. Do not spend your money foolishly because you can't turn it over. But ingrained carpet you can turn over. What a good use of your money.
Yeah.